The demand didn't come with a question. It came with an ultimatum. Pay for your sister's wedding or disappear from our lives. No pause, no explanation, just a sentence dropped into my phone like it had been rehearsed for years. I was sitting alone in my apartment when the message arrived, watching rain crawl down the window like it was trying to escape the city. I read the words once, then again, then a third time, slowly, carefully, waiting for the punchline that never came. They weren't angry. They weren't emotional. They were certain. Certain that my money was theirs. Certain that my silence meant consent. Certain that if I refused, I would be the one erased. What they didn't understand yet was simple. I had already learned how to live without them. They just hadn't learned how to live without me. My name is Elena Parker. I'm 33 years old, single, financially independent, and for most of my adult life, the invisible daughter. Not the troubled one, not the dramatic one, the reliable one. The one who paid quietly, who fixed problems without announcing them, who showed up when others failed. I live in Seattle now, far from the house I grew up in, and even farther from the expectations that followed me out of it. I work in logistics consulting, nothing glamorous, nothing flashy, but I understand systems, timelines, and leverage better than most people realize. That skill kept my family afloat longer than they ever knew, and it's the same skill that finally taught me when to stop. In my family, love was conditional, not openly cruel, just transactional. My parents believed sacrifice equaled virtue, but only when it flowed upward, toward them, toward the image they wanted to maintain. My younger sister, Lena, was the centerpiece. She had charm, a loud laugh, a way of filling rooms without ever fixing anything. She needed help constantly and received it eagerly. I needed nothing and was expected to give everything. When Lena quit jobs impulsively, it was finding herself. When I worked weekends, it was because I had nothing better to do. By the time we were adults, the pattern was cemented. I paid, she received, they applauded her. It started small, a car repair here, a credit card balance there, a temporary loan that was never repaid. Every time I hesitated, my mother reminded me, family helps family. So I helped. When my father's small contracting business hit a slow season, I covered payroll. When Lena's rent was late, I wired money without comment. When my parents refinanced the house and needed a buffer, I quietly provided it. No receipts, no contracts, no acknowledgement, just expectations stacking quietly on my shoulders. I told myself it was temporary. It never is. Lena's engagement announcement came on a Sunday afternoon. Group text, ring photo, champagne emojis. Her fiancé was someone she'd known less than a year, loud, ambitious, chronically unemployed but working on something big. They wanted a destination wedding. Italy. Of course they did. I congratulated her, sent flowers, kept my distance. I already knew what was coming. It arrived 3 weeks later, not from Lena, from my parents. A single message written together, as if unity made it fair. Your sister's wedding budget is tight. We expect you to cover the venue and catering. It's your duty. If you can't do this for the family, then maybe you shouldn't be part of it anymore. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. No pleas, no discussion, no acknowledgement of everything I'd already given, just a threat disguised as tradition. What my parents didn't know, what they had never bothered to ask, was how carefully I tracked everything. Every transfer, every emergency, every just this once. I wasn't emotional about money, I was methodical, and for the first time, I wasn't angry either. I felt clear, because something finally snapped into place. They didn't see me as a daughter, they saw me as a resource, and resources can be withdrawn. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I opened my laptop, created a new folder, named it simply Family. Inside were years of statements, timestamps, and quiet generosity they never acknowledged. I realized something then. Walking away wasn't abandonment, it was accounting, and for the first time in my life, I was ready to balance the books. I didn't answer them that night, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew exactly what they expected me to say. They expected resistance, then guilt, then compliance. That cycle had worked for decades. So instead, I stayed silent. Silence unsettles people who rely on control. By morning, my phone had already started buzzing again. Missed calls, short messages, longer ones that sounded calmer, almost reasonable. They weren't asking yet, they were positioning. I spent that morning doing something I should have done years earlier. I organized, not emotionally, structurally. I opened the folder I'd created and began sorting through 5 years of quiet support. Mortgage transfers labeled temporary, credit card payments framed as just until next month, rent deposits for apartments I never lived in, medical bills covered without thanks. By noon, the total sat on my screen. 6 figures. Not once had anyone asked if I could afford it. They had assumed I could. The family house still stood in my parents' name, but what they'd forgotten, what I'd never reminded them of, was how it stayed that way. When refinancing almost collapsed during the pandemic, I'd stepped in quietly. I co-signed. I backed the risk. Not out of love, out of responsibility. Responsibility they mistook for obligation. I pulled the documents from my cloud storage and read them carefully. Rights, conditions, clauses. Leverage doesn't shout, it waits. My mother called just after dinner. Her tone was gentle now, measured. She talked about stress, about how weddings bring families together, about how Lena is so fragile right now. I listened. I always listened. Then she mentioned the word sacrifice. That's when I knew nothing had changed. They weren't asking for help. They were asking for submission. I had spent my life believing distance was disloyal, saying no meant being selfish. But listening to her speak, soft, practiced, unwavering, I finally understood something that should have been obvious years ago. They didn't fear losing me. They feared losing access to me. That difference matters. Within days, photos began circulating, venue previews, mood boards, dress fittings. My sister glowed in every picture. Not once did she ask if I was coming. Not once did she check in. She didn't need to. She assumed I'd fall in line, because I always had. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't announce boundaries. I let the systems do the talking. First, I contacted the bank, not to threaten, to clarify. Then the accountant, then a lawyer I'd used once years ago for a property issue. I asked precise questions. I got precise answers, and every answer pointed to the same truth. I wasn't trapped. I'd just never used my exit. By the end of the week, things started to wobble. A payment didn't go through. An approval stalled. A deadline moved without explanation. Nothing dramatic, just enough to feel. My parents assumed it was bad timing. They didn't connect it to me. Why would they? They'd never imagined I would stop. Then came the final message, not from my parents, from Lena. It wasn't cruel. That would have been easier. It was casual. She said the venue needed confirmation, that deposits were due, that she hoped I wouldn't make things awkward. That was the moment, not because of the money, but because she assumed my presence in her life only mattered when I was useful. I didn't respond. Instead, I closed my laptop. I went for a walk. Cold air, clear head, and somewhere between the sound of traffic and my own footsteps, I made a decision that felt heavy and right. I would not explain myself. I would not justify my worth. I would simply stop absorbing the consequences of their choices. I didn't block anyone. I didn't announce anything. I just stepped back, and when you step back from a structure built on your support, the collapse doesn't need drama. It reveals itself naturally. The collapse didn't arrive with shouting. It arrived with confusion. Bills that had always been handled suddenly weren't. Emails that used to be answered immediately now sat untouched. Deadlines passed quietly, then urgently. My parents assumed it was a mistake. My sister assumed it was temporary. Neither of them assumed it was intentional. That was their last mistake. The first real panic came when a major payment bounced. Not the wedding venue, the house. The same house they'd lived in for decades. The same house they believed was untouchable. I found out because the bank called me, not them. They asked if I wanted to cover the gap again. I said no. I said it calmly, and when the silence followed, I knew the shift had completed. Within days, the wedding plans started changing, not officially, subtly. A venue upgrade quietly reverted, the guest list tightened, the open bar turned into a limited selection. My sister blamed stress. My parents blamed timing. No one blamed entitlement. My father called first, not angry, not loud, confused. He asked if something was wrong. I told him nothing was wrong. This was simply what happened when I stopped fixing things behind the scenes. He didn't argue. He didn't apologize. He just asked how long this would last. That question said everything. The second call came days later. This time, both parents. Their tone had changed. They spoke carefully, as if I were someone they needed to negotiate with, not command. They mentioned family, sacrifice, history. I let them finish, then I told them something I had never said out loud before. I was done paying for love. The wedding still happened. Smaller, quieter, not ruined, just reduced. I didn't go. I didn't send a gift. I sent silence, and for the first time, my absence spoke louder than my presence ever had. Weeks later, I heard through extended family that my sister was angry, not at me, at our parents. She said they should have handled things better. She never said she should have treated me differently. That told me everything I needed to know. People imagine moments like this come with triumph. They don't. What they come with is stillness, the kind that settles when you stop betraying yourself. I didn't feel victorious. I felt released. They stopped asking. They stopped assuming. They started hesitating before reaching out. Not because they respected me more, but because they finally understood I wasn't guaranteed, and that knowledge reshapes behavior faster than any argument. I didn't move. I didn't disappear. I didn't rebuild anything dramatically. I simply continued, lighter, more intentional, more selective. I learned that boundaries don't need announcements. They need consistency. Months later, I reviewed the ledger one last time. Not to reopen wounds, to close the file. I archived it, deleted shortcuts, cleared space. Because once you stop investing in people who drain you, your life gains margin. And margin is freedom. Some families confuse obligation with love. They mistake endurance for loyalty and silence for agreement, until the quiet one stops paying. Not in anger, not in revenge, but in clarity. And when that happens, everything they took for granted finally shows its true cost.